You've been feeling it too, haven't you? That subtle shift, a whisper of something missing. A weight lifted, but not in a good way. It's in the air, a silent thief of substance. It begins small, almost unnoticed, but once it starts, it never stops. This is the story of Blackwater Cove and the insidious fading that consumed it. Join us in the shadows, never miss a nightmare. Like and subscribe. Ilara Vance sought refuge in Blackwater Cove. She was an antique restorer, a keeper of the past. Her hands, skilled and steady, brought life back to forgotten things. Here, in this quiet, windswept place, she hoped to find peace and new treasures to save. Her remote workshop was a sanctuary. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight through tall windows. She arranged her tools with a ritualistic care, each brush, each delicate probe finding its place. The first few pieces she'd acquired sat waiting, promising hours of quiet, focused work. Her first task, a porcelain doll from the early 1900s, its painted eyes stared blankly. Ilara picked it up, expecting the familiar heft of ceramic, the solid weight of history. But it felt wrong, unusually light, almost hollow like a shell. She turned it over in her hands, a frown touching her brow. It should have been heavier, much heavier. She dismissed it. Tired hands, she told herself. The long drive, the new environment, it was just an old doll after all. Perhaps it was a lighter make than she was used to. Her mind, ever practical, sought a logical answer. Next, an antique nautical compass. Brass casing, intricate workings, a beautiful piece. She lifted it. Again, that strange sensation, too light. It felt thin, almost fragile, like a forgotten memory. The brass, which should have been dense and cool, felt like a hollow casing. A mere whisper of what it should be. It was like holding a ghost of a compass, not the real thing. What would you do if the world around you felt less real? She blamed its age. Decades of sea air, perhaps, had subtly eroded its mass. It was an old piece, after all. Old things decay. It was part of her work to fight that decay, but this felt different. This felt like a fading. Needing a break, Ilara walked through Blackwater Cove. The town was eerily quiet, too quiet. The air itself felt still, heavy, as if holding its breath. No children playing, no bustling shops, just the sound of the distant waves. It felt unnervingly unvisited, forgotten, as if the town itself was waiting for something, or perhaps for nothing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a silence that listened. The few locals she passed seemed distant. Their expressions were flat, their gazes unfocused. They looked through her, not at her, as if part of them was elsewhere, or perhaps not there at all. A shiver traced her spine. It wasn't cold. It was the chill of something unseen, something unsaid. The town felt like a stage set, ready for an audience that would never arrive, or perhaps an audience that had already left. Back in her workshop, Ilara began work on a shipwrecked lantern, a sturdy piece salvaged from a vessel lost centuries ago. This was solid history. This would be heavy. She took up a cloth, beginning to polish its heavy iron frame. Her fingers traced the cold, rough metal. The reassuring weight was there at first, the solid reality of it. Then she felt it, a subtle, impossible give to its substance, as if the iron wasn't quite solid, not a flex, not a bend, but a fleeting sensation of something yielding where it should not, like pressing on a dense fog. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came. She pulled her hand back, staring at the lantern. It looked solid, perfectly normal, but the memory of that strange give lingered, a cold knot in her stomach. Would you have dismissed it? She had to know. Ilara placed the lantern on her antique balance scale. The pans wavered. The needle swung wildly. Inconsistent readings. It wouldn't settle, as if the lantern couldn't decide how much it weighed. Old equipment, she thought, trying to rationalize. The sea air, perhaps affecting the delicate mechanisms. Yes, that had to be it. There was no other explanation, was there? She continued her work, but the feeling persisted. The lantern, which should have been dense and heavy, felt lighter with each passing hour. A subtle, impossible reduction. It was defying physics, defying reality. Her meticulous work, her desperate need to preserve, felt meaningless. How could she preserve something that was subtly, impossibly losing its very essence? It was like trying to mend a ghost. The past was slipping away, not just decaying, but fading. An unseen force was at work. Something was siphoning away the fundamental substance of existence, leaving behind only hollowed-out husks. The thought was a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in her bones. What would you do if your world began to thin? As night fell, casting long, distorted shadows across the workshop, Ilara looked at the lantern again. The moon, a thin sliver in the sky, offered little comfort. The air grew colder, but it wasn't the temperature. It was something else. In the dim light, she perceived it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer around its edges, like heat haze, but without heat. A distortion in the air itself, around the solid object, as if the lantern was flickering between states of being. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the shimmer vanished. The lantern seemed to solidify back into place, looking perfectly normal. But Ilara knew. She felt a chilling sense of dread that something was fundamentally wrong. The world was losing its weight, and she was alone with the fading. The cold light of dawn did little to ease Ilara's mind. The shipwrecked lantern sat on her workbench, looking the same, yet feeling entirely wrong. It was lighter, undeniably so. Like a phantom limb, it held its shape but lacked its true weight. What if your most solid objects began to betray your senses? She placed the lantern on her most precise scale. The needle quivered, then settled on a weight far less than it should be. She tried another, then a third. Each time, the impossible lightness remained. It defied all logic, all known physics. She measured its volume, then recalculated its density. The numbers screamed impossibility. Its form was unchanged, yet its very substance had thinned. It was as if something vital, something fundamental, had been siphoned away, leaving a shell. The unease spread. An old oak desk, once sturdy, now felt less substantial beneath her hand. A stack of rare, leather-bound books felt like hollow cardboard, their pages fluttering too easily, as if they too had lost their intrinsic weight. She picked up a heavy tome on ancient maritime history. Its pages, once thick and fibrous, now felt like tissue paper. The ink, usually dark and rich, seemed faded, almost transparent. The words themselves felt lighter, as if their meaning was draining away. Desperate for a distraction, Ilara walked to the docks. A local fisherman, Old Man Hemlock, was pulling in his nets. They should have been heavy with brine and rope, but they floated with an eerie buoyancy. The nets defied gravity, almost skipping across the water. Hemlock seemed not to notice, his face blank, his movements slow. Did he not feel it? Or had he simply forgotten what true weight felt like? She tried to speak to Mrs. Gable, the shopkeeper, about the odd lightness. Mrs. Gable stared blankly, her eyes unfocused. Things are always as they are, she mumbled, her voice flat, devoid of real understanding. It was as if the words themselves, weight and substance, held no meaning for her, or perhaps her own memory of what things should feel like had already begun to fade. What if the very concept of reality could be erased from minds? Walking back, Ilara saw it. A cobblestone on the street rippled, briefly becoming translucent, a chilling flicker of insubstantiality. Then it snapped back, solid once more. But you've seen things like that, haven't you? Things that weren't quite right. She knelt, touching the stone. It felt solid, cold, real, but the image of its brief transparency was burned into her mind. A terrifying glimpse behind the curtain of reality, showing a void. Back in her workshop, Ilara tried to write down her observations. Her hand trembled as she uncapped her pen. The ink flowed onto the paper, a dark, reassuring stream. But as the words dried, the ink seemed to lose its vibrancy. It faded, turning to a pale gray. The paper itself felt thinner, less fibrous, as if the very record of her fear was losing its weight, its permanence. A new, more personal terror began to creep in. Her own movements felt slightly off. Her limbs felt lighter than they should be, a subtle disconnect between her mind and her physical self. Was she next? She lifted her hand, watching it. It seemed solid, yet the sensation was wrong, like moving through water but without the resistance. The ground beneath her feet felt less stable, less substantial. Seeking answers, or perhaps just a reminder of solid history, Ilara visited the town's small, neglected museum. A place dedicated to the weight of the past. Inside, the artifacts, once solid and imposing, now felt strangely fragile, like dust motes suspended in amber, waiting to dissipate. The air was thick, with a silence that felt empty, not peaceful. She reached for a preserved whalebone carving, a piece of ancient history. It should have been hard, dense, cold, but as her fingers brushed it, it almost crumbled into air. She pulled her hand away sharply, a gasp caught in her throat. A few ghostly flakes drifted down, vanishing before they hit the floor. The carving solidified again, but the terror was real. What horror was this? Not destruction, but erasure. Not death, but dissipation. A slow, insidious drain of all that was real, leaving behind nothing. What would you do when everything you knew turned to air? That night back in her workshop, the shadows felt deeper, more hungry. Every object seemed to hum with a subtle, unnerving vibration. The air itself felt thin, brittle. She tried to lift a heavy antique chest. It was a solid piece, crafted from dark, dense wood. It had always required effort, a strain on her muscles. But now, as her hands gripped its handles, it felt like she was lifting nothing at all, a mere shadow of its former weight. It rose with an unnatural ease, almost floating. As she stared at it, a section of its wooden frame seemed to visibly blur. The grain of the wood, the subtle imperfections, all softened, then subtly receded. It was as if a memory of its true form was fading, being absorbed into the nothingness that now threatened to consume everything. The chest was still there, but less. And Ilara knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that soon there would be nothing left. The false comfort of dawn had been ripped away. The lightness Ilara had felt was no longer subtle. It was a hungry void now. Objects in her workshop were not just lighter. They were becoming translucent, their edges blurring like watercolors in rain. What would you do if your world began to thin before your eyes? The air itself seemed to hum with an unnatural tension. A restored music box, a piece she had spent weeks on, had simply begun to shimmer, then its intricate carvings softened, its brass fittings became hazy. Then it was gone, just an empty space on the shelf. Her tools, once solid and reliable, now vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the ghost of their presence. It was not destruction, but a siphoning, a quiet, terrifying erasure. Her hands, once so sure, now hesitated to touch anything. Her meticulous work was meaningless. A restored clock, a masterpiece of tiny gears and polished wood, simply dissipated into shimmering particles as she set it on a shelf. Its gears became insubstantial before her eyes, like sand in a forgotten hourglass. What would you do if your life's work simply vanished? The horror was not in the sound of breaking, but in the silence of vanishing. The gears, once precise and solid, now looked like water, shimmering and blurring. They held their form for a moment, then simply ceased to be. The quiet disappearance was worse than any crash. Her purpose, her very reason for being in Blackwater Cove, was gone. How could she preserve what refused to stay? The past was not just decaying, it was dissolving, taking with it the very meaning of her life. The weight of nothing settled heavily on her. The town itself was visibly affected. As Elara stepped outside, the familiar buildings seemed to waver. They were partially transparent, like ghosts of their former selves, standing on the edge of fading away completely. Was she seeing things, or was this the new reality? The roads, once solid beneath her feet, were patchy, dissolving into stretches of warped air. Each step was a gamble, a terrifying dance on the edge of a void. The world was losing its footing, and she along with it. The very ground felt less real. The lighthouse, a symbol of permanence, seemed to flicker, its light a faint, uncertain pulse. Blackwater Cove was becoming a phantom town, a memory waiting to be forgotten. The silence grew deeper, as if the town itself was holding its breath. She encountered Old Man Hemlock, the fisherman she knew well. His figure was hazy, almost ethereal, like smoke caught in a breath. He was there, yet not entirely. The sight sent a cold shiver down her spine. Was this what everyone was becoming? His voice, once gruff and deep, was a faint whisper, barely audible over the muted sound of the waves. It was like listening to a distant echo, a voice from another time or another dimension. The words themselves felt thin, without substance. He looked at her with vacant eyes, not recognizing her, or perhaps he was unable to form the memory. His gaze passed right through her, as if she too was becoming insubstantial. The thought was a chilling, personal terror. What if you were forgotten before you were gone? Desperate to capture proof, to hold onto what was real, Elara tried to capture images of the disappearing town with her old camera. Each click was a desperate plea against the void. Maybe a photograph could hold the weight that reality could not. But the photos came out blank or distorted, just swirling gray nothingness where buildings should have been. It was as if the camera itself was affected, or the light itself lacked substance, unable to capture what was no longer truly there. The camera felt lighter in her hands, its familiar weight less reassuring. Even the light, once crisp and clear, now felt thin, unable to carry the image of a fading world. The very act of seeing was becoming meaningless. How do you fight something that steals light? She tried to recall specific details about her most cherished artifacts, the ones that had now vanished. The delicate filigree of a silver locket, the chipped paint on a porcelain doll. But her memories were hazy. The details slipped away like smoke through her fingers. It was as if the essence drain was consuming not just physical objects, but the very concept and memory of them. The past was not just disappearing, it was being forgotten, erased from the mind. The weight of her memories, once solid anchors, was also fading. What was real if even the past could not be held? The horror deepened. It was not just things that were being lost, but the very history of them. All that was becoming all that never was. She found a faded journal from an early settler of Blackwater Cove. A desperate hope flickered. Perhaps answers lay in the distant past. Her fingers trembled as she opened the brittle, yellowed pages, a whisper of history in her hands. But as she read, the ink on the pages visibly lightened, fading before her eyes. The paper became brittle, then simply crumbled to nothing, dissolving into dust that vanished as it fell. It was as if the past itself was being consumed, unwritten. The words, the lives, the very essence of those who came before were being erased, not just from the page, but from existence. The knowledge, the stories, the warnings all turning to dust, then to nothing. The past was no longer a burden, but a void. She realized the true terror. It wasn't destruction. It was erasure. Not only did things cease to exist, but the very memory of them, their impact, their weight in the world, was also being siphoned away. A terrifying oblivion. What is left when everything is forgotten? The sound of the ocean, once a constant comfort, a powerful roar, was now muted, thin, like a distant echo of what it once was. The world was becoming quieter, emptier. The very air felt thin, ready to dissipate. The silence was the sound of everything vanishing. Ilara looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror, her breath caught. Parts of her own image were indistinct, hazy, like a poorly developed photograph, as if she herself was starting to lose definition. A terrifying prelude. Was she next? The essence drain was not just outside, not just in the objects, not just in the town. It was in her. She was losing her own weight, her own substance. Soon there would be nothing left but a memory, fading, until even that was gone. And then only nothing. The chill had settled deep within Ilara, not just around her, but inside. The essence drain was no longer an outside force. It was a cold, creeping void in her very bones. She felt a growing, insidious lightness within herself. What if your own body began to betray you, piece by agonizing piece? Her steps felt too light, as if she was walking on air. The familiar weight of her own body was gone, replaced by an unnerving buoyancy. It was like moving through a dream, but a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Blackwater Cove was no longer a town. It was a phantom landscape. Most buildings were mere impressions, translucent outlines against the pale, unfeeling sky. Their edges blurred like forgotten memories. The very air felt thin, hollow, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting to vanish. Every breath she took felt less substantial, as if even the oxygen was losing its weight, its presence. Then she saw them, spectral outlines of former townsfolk. Their forms flickered in and out of her perception, like old film projected onto thin air. They were there, yet not there at all. They were unable to communicate, mere husks where people once were. Their eyes, when she could discern them, were empty, reflecting nothing, like echoes of voices long silenced. It was a profound loneliness, a terror of being truly alone in an unmaking world. What is worse than being alone? Being alone when nothing else is truly there. The essence drain was no longer just an effect. It felt like an unseen presence, a cold, indifferent vacuum, a cosmic horror that simply was silently consuming all tangibility. Desperate, Elara attempted to leave the town, but the roads leading out were similarly affected, becoming indistinct. They dissolved into stretches of gray nothingness. There was no escape. The escape route was not a way out, but a pathway to further dissolution. Every step forward felt like a step deeper into the void, a journey into nothingness. The world was unmaking itself. She found remnants of old sea charts in her workshop, maps that once guided sailors across vast oceans. A desperate hope flickered. Perhaps they could still show a way. But as she touched them, the ink disappeared, leaving blank parchment. The lines, the names, the very history of navigation simply vanished, like a whisper on the wind. The blank parchment then faded away completely. The very concept of direction and navigation was being erased. What use is a map when there is nowhere left to go? The memories of her life, her past, her driving purpose as a restorer felt like fragile, fading photographs in her mind, each one less clear, less substantial than the last. She struggled to recall her own family, their faces, their voices. Were they real? Had they ever been? The horror wasn't just losing them, but losing the memory of ever having them. Elara found an ancient, waterlogged logbook from a ship long lost. Its binding was barely holding, its pages swollen, a relic of a forgotten journey, perhaps a key. As she opened it, she perceived faint, ethereal whispers, not words, but a sense of profound, inescapable despair. A soundless scream from the heart of oblivion. It was as if the logbook carried the fading echoes of past civilizations. Worlds that also succumbed to this cosmic consumption, their very essence siphoned away into the void. She tried to hold a tool, a cherished hammer, a symbol of her work, of solid craftsmanship. Its weight should have been familiar, reassuring, but it felt wrong. Her fingers passed through it slightly, a chilling confirmation that her own body was losing its fundamental substance, like touching a ghost, but the ghost was her own hand. It felt like she was losing herself, piece by agonizing piece, not just her memories or the things around her, but the very flesh and bone that made her real. What if you were fading away? Elara realized the true horror. It wasn't just about things disappearing. It was about the very idea of existence being slowly, relentlessly siphoned away. The concept itself was under attack, leaving behind only void, a blank slate where reality once was, a world unwritten, unwitnessed, unremembered. This was the ultimate terror, the true end. She reached out, her hand passing through the space where her hammer had been. Nothing, just cold, empty air. The world was becoming less and less, and she was part of it. The finality of it pressed down on her, heavier than any physical weight. Soon, there would be nothing left to lose. And then, terrifyingly, there would be nothing left of her at all. The cold had deepened, not just around Elara, but within her very bones. The essence drain was no longer a distant threat. It was inside, dissolving her from within. Her skin, once firm, now felt strangely thin, almost translucent. What would you do if your own body began to betray you, not with pain, but with absence? She raised a hand to her face, feeling the strange, unsettling lightness. Her fingers seemed to shimmer, their outlines wavering. Her hair, which should have been a solid mass, seemed to catch the light and vanish, then reappear. It was like watching herself dissolve, bit by agonizing bit. She tried to speak, to call out, to make a sound, any sound to affirm her presence. But her voice was a mere whisper, thin and reedy. It often cut out completely, leaving only a faint gasp of air. The horror was not the silence, but the absence of her own voice. Her thoughts, once sharp and clear, now flickered like dying candles. Memories, vital anchors of her past, became elusive. Specific details about her life, her work, her very identity slipped away like smoke. Who was she? What was her purpose, now that everything was fading? She struggled to hold on to names, faces, places. Her own history was becoming a blur, a collection of half-remembered dreams. It was as if the essence drain was not just taking her physical form, but also the very substance of her mind. What is left when your own self begins to erase? Her workshop, once a sanctuary filled with cherished artifacts, was now almost completely empty. The shelves were bare, the tables vacant. Only the faintest outlines of where objects once stood remained. Ghostly impressions on the dusty floor, like footprints in snow that had long melted. The only thing left of her life's work were these hollow spaces, the imprints of what was, now mere suggestions of substance. Her purpose, to preserve the past, had become a cruel joke. How could you preserve nothing? Fragmented, chilling visions flickered in her mind. Not of the past as it was, but of the unmaking asterisk of the past. Ancient structures dissolving, landscapes becoming formless. It was as if she was witnessing the essence drain's ancient, inexorable march through time, consuming not just the present, but all history. These were not memories, but visions of cosmic horror. Worlds unmaking themselves, civilizations fading into nothingness. Was this the true nature of the drain, not just a local plague, but an ancient, universal hunger that had claimed countless realities before Blackwater Cove? She saw a spectral chair, a faint outline of a familiar piece of furniture. She tried to grasp it, to feel its solid form, to anchor herself to something real. But her hands passed clean through it, just air. The line between solid reality and ghostly presence had completely blurred. There was nothing to hold on to. No weight, no substance, no resistance. The world was becoming a trick of the light, a mere suggestion. What would you do if the very ground beneath your feet offered no true support? The cold, indifferent presence of the essence drain felt closer now. Not a sound, not a shape, but a vast, ancient hunger. It wasn't destroying, not burning, not breaking. It was merely consuming the weight of everything. A silent, inexorable siphoning. It pressed in on her, a cosmic horror that simply was. It had no malice, no intent. It was simply a process, an ancient, trans-dimensional entropy that left behind only hollowed-out husks. The very air felt heavy with its presence, yet thin with its effect. Ilara made a desperate, final attempt to leave some trace of herself. A warning, a record. She raised a trembling hand, trying to scratch a mark onto the nearest wall. But as her fingers moved, the wall itself shimmered. The faint mark she made instantly faded, as if nothing could hold substance against the drain. No message, no proof, no lasting impression. Her efforts were meaningless. What would you do if your every action, your every trace, was immediately erased? She looked at her own hands. One moment they were solid, familiar. The next, they became momentarily transparent, showing the faint outlines of the empty room behind them. Then they solidified again, only to flicker once more. It was a terrifying dance of presence and absence. The horror wasn't knowing she was going to die. That was a comfort compared to this. The horror was knowing she was going to cease to have ever been, to be unmade, erased, forgotten, as if she had never existed at all. The terror of nothingness itself. She remembered a fleeting thought from earlier in her life, a casual worry, a simple joy, a memory, small and insignificant, yet utterly hers. She tried to hold on to it, to cling to its substance, but it was slipping. The memory itself was now gone, not just faded, but entirely absent, as if it had never existed. The essence drain was inside her, consuming her very consciousness, her past, her present. Her mind was becoming a blank slate. What would it be like to have your own thoughts, your own self simply vanish, to be aware of it, yet powerless to stop it? This was the true horror, far deeper than any physical pain. The loss of identity, the erosion of the I. She tried to speak her own name aloud, Ilara, to affirm her existence, to give voice to the self that was rapidly dissolving. Her mouth opened, her throat strained, but the sound caught. Only a faint, almost inaudible gasp escaped her lips. A ghost of a sound, a whisper of a name that wouldn't form. The horror of her identity slipping away beyond her control was absolute. The essence drain was taking her very being. Every breath felt thinner, every beat of her heart felt less substantial. She was becoming less and less. The world was unmaking itself around her, and she was unmaking along with it. A silent, terrifying descent into oblivion. Soon there would be nothing left to lose. No memories, no body, no name. Just the vast, cold emptiness of the essence drain, the ultimate erasure, the final, terrifying silence. And then, terrifyingly, there would be nothing left of her at all, not even a memory, just the void. What if one day you simply ceased to have ever been? What if your entire existence was simply erased? This was the end, the true end of everything. The world was a whisper now. Blackwater Cove, once a town of solid stone and timber, was barely there. Just an echo on the landscape, a void where tangibility once was. And Ilara, the meticulous restorer, was part of that fading too. She felt it with every passing moment, a profound, terrifying lightness within her very being. She was barely substantial, flickering in and out of her own perception. One moment, a fleeting sense of her hands, her feet. The next, a terrifying absence. Like a faulty projection, she was there, then not. Could you still feel yourself if you were slowly becoming nothing? Her consciousness, once a sharp, clear stream, was now fragmented. Her thoughts dissolved like wisps of smoke, slipping through her mind before she could grasp them. It was like trying to hold water in open hands, only the water was her very self. She grasped at fleeting images, memories of loved ones, her mother's smile, her father's strong hands, but they slipped through her mental grasp like water, like sand. Each attempt to hold them made them fade faster. What if your most cherished memories simply vanished? The essence drain had reached its peak. A profound, chilling silence pervaded the area, a silence that felt heavier than any sound. It was the quiet of a world holding its breath, waiting for the final unmaking. The air itself felt thin, brittle. This silence was broken only by the faintest, almost imperceptible sifting sound. The sound of reality unmaking itself. It was not a violent tearing, but a gentle, ceaseless fall, like fine sand through an hourglass. Only the sand was everything that was. Ilara made one last, desperate effort to experience anything solid, to feel the ground beneath her feet, to press down, to feel its resistance. But her steps were too light, her feet barely touching the dissolving earth. It was like walking on air, but air that was also fading. She tried to touch her own face, to feel the contour of her cheek, the bridge of her nose, to find herself in the physical world. But her perception of her own body was gone. Her fingers passed through where her skin should be, finding only the cold, empty air. A profound, terrifying emptiness settled where her emotions once resided. The fear itself, once primal and all-consuming, was now fading. Like a fire running out of fuel, it simply lessened, leaving only a cold, indifferent acceptance of oblivion. There was no panic, no struggle left, just a quiet understanding of what was happening. The horror was no longer a sharp pain, but a dull, pervasive ache that slowly, subtly began to vanish too. What is left when even fear abandons you? She saw, or perhaps perceived, the very edges of her existence becoming transparent. Not just her body, but the space around her, the air she breathed. The boundary between herself and the surrounding nothingness was dissolving, like sugar in water. This was not dying. Dying had a finality, a weight. This was being unmade, being unwritten, like a drawing erased from a page, leaving no trace, no mark of its ever having been there. The very concept of being was draining away. The horror was complete, not death, but ultimate erasure. The essence drain was not a monster with intent, not a conscious evil. It was a fundamental process of the universe, an ancient entropy. It simply was asterisk. It was consuming all weight, all tangibility, all substance, until only absolute nothingness remained. A blank slate where everything once was, and then, terrifyingly, nothing at all. The universe was simply exhaling, and everything was becoming air. Her final thought, fragmented and fleeting, was a terrifying realization. Her life, her work, her very being would leave no trace, no memory, no impact on anything. It was as if she had never been. What would it be like to never have been? The burden of preservation, the weight of the past she had carried, was meaningless. All that effort, all that care, dissolving into the void. It was as if the universe itself was hitting a reset button, but not for creation, only for erasure. The last sensation Ilara experienced was a profound lightness, not just physical as her body faded, but existential, as if the burden of her own existence, the very weight of her being, had been lifted. It was a serene, terrifying void. Her perception, her consciousness, flickered one last time, a final, almost imperceptible spark, a last gasp of being before the ultimate silence. A final moment of awareness, then nothing, absolute, complete nothingness. Then there was nothing. No echo, no memory, no trace. The essence drain had claimed its last victim. Blackwater Cove, Ilara Vance, and all they were simply ceased to be. Unwritten, unwitnessed, unremembered. The story ends here, but the horror does not. What happened to Ilara can happen to anything, to anyone. A slow, insidious siphoning of substance, of memory, of being, leaving no memory of their passing, no trace that they ever existed, just a subtle, quiet absence where they once were. A world that simply forgets because the very concept of what was has been unmade. Imagine one day you reach for a cherished photograph and it feels too light, or a memory, a warm, comforting memory, slips through your mind like smoke. What if the very fabric of your world began to thin? What if the people around you, the places you know, the very history you cling to, began to lose their weight, their substance, their reality, and you were the only one who noticed? This isn't a monster that chases you in the dark. This is the dark itself, slowly consuming everything, not with violence, but with a terrifying, absolute quiet. A quiet so profound, it erases the very concept of sound. Would you even know if it happened? If the world, and you along with it, simply ceased to have ever been? Think about it. Would you even know?